So why is AI important to America?
Yeah, this is one actually nobody even argues with. I think with crypto, people make arguments of whether it's important or not, and obviously we believe very strongly that it is. With AI, I think it's unambiguous that I think everybody agrees that it's important, and it's going to be a cornerstone technology for economic growth. Like if it's allowed to play, if it's allowed to play out the way that it should, I think it's what's going to follow is at least the equivalent of the internet boom of the 1990s, if not the boom of the computer industry from the 50s on. Which again was enormously powerful for America. And then look, AI is powerful enough where it may be even bigger than those two, right? Yeah. And so this may be the biggest technological boom of all time. And so the economic aspect of this is incredibly important. And then look, the entirety of military doctrine, military warfare, it's all going to change. It's all going to change around AI. By the way, that's already happening. So the Pentagon has already classified, the Department of Defense has already classified AI and autonomy as what they call the third offset, which means basically the cornerstone technology for the next generation of there have only been 3 offsets in the history of in the post-World War II era. The first was nuclear weapons. The second was maneuver warfare and associated things. And the third is AI and autonomy. And so there's going to be a complete revolution in what they call revolution in military affairs, and complete reconstitution of the entire way that the U.S. military operates and global militaries operate. And the DoD, they've already identified this. We work with them a lot on this. They're pushing very hard on this. We're funding a lot of companies behind this, and so this is going to really matter a lot. And then China has already declared the exact same thing, and so they're completely reinventing their military. In the same way, it's a giant national security priority for them. They have total control over their domestic tech industry, and so they're completely harnessing the capability of their smart people to do this in a very directed, controlled way. And so this is the technology race of our time. This is going to determine the shape of the world for hundreds of years. This is going to determine how government works. This is going to determine how surveillance works. This is going to determine who wins wars.
Is that all?
Yes. Well, and you can see it. You can see it. Yes, exactly. And then,
I don't know why you're so worked up about this.
Well, look, and then you can see it. You can see it you can already see it. You can see it on the Ukrainian battlefield, right? And I won't go into huge detail here, but there's a massive shift. This is all playing out right now on the Ukraine battlefield. And then it's also obvious that it's going to have big implications for what's happening in the Middle East and everywhere else. And so this is as central and foundational technology as you can imagine, and it is like absolutely required that America win.
Yeah. And so what have we seen so far from the Biden administration, the White House in particular? I think Congress, I'll just kind of preempt it by saying, they're trying in a bipartisan way to get to an answer. The Biden administration has been different, and maybe you can run through kind of what they've done thus far. Yeah,
look, so there's different branches to it, and you highlighted the Commerce Secretary as an example of somebody who we've been talking to, and I think.
By the way, Gina Raimondo has been absolutely fantastic on her thinking on AI policy, how it relates to China and CFIUS and so forth, as has Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor. So, when we talk about the White House, we're kind of talking about, in this case, particularly an executive order that came from a different portion of it.
Yeah. And then look, there's also many, many smart people in the Defense Department and in the intelligence agencies as well, I would highlight, who are doing really good work. And so there's a lot of positives. A lot of people are really trying to figure this out.
All right. We were trying to figure out in the executive order where kind of this idea, just conceptually, of putting a limit on 10 to the 26 flops and how much math you're allowed to do in kind of life, basically. And so you and I did a lot of research. We talked to people who were advising the White House. We spoke to kind of policymakers in the White House. And it really comes down to a belief that we think is highly incorrect, which is basically that, if I can summarize, there will only be maybe 3 or 4 foundation models in the whole world that are relevant, because only a few companies can afford the number of GPUs to make a relevant model. There's a few issues with this idea. The first being, there's a bunch of techniques that are already showing that you can make a pretty amazing model off of somebody else's model. There's a technique called distillation that we've spoken of the past. Secondly, Right now, it turns out that labeled post-training data is more effective than adding GPUs. So like maybe kind of scale is the only thing that matters, and maybe it isn't. But there are just so many, really important foundation models out there that aren't big right now that are getting massive usage and aren't in the kind of canonical 3. And the idea, if there's only 3 and they're all from the biggest companies in the world, then you can put, flaming hoops in front of them and they'll jump through them and it's fine. But for little tech, which is, by the way, everything that we've invested in foundation model, not everything, but almost everything is growing incredibly fast and doing incredibly well. And these will be snuffed out by this kind of regulation. Maybe you can talk about kind of why, a flop limit is so weird.
Yeah, so for people who don't know, so flop is a technical term in computer science. It stands for floating point operations per second, and I realize that explains nothing. So let me explain what that means. It's just basically, it's a measure of the speed of the computer, how many calculations per second the computer can do, how many math problems per second a computer can solve. And, computers are very fast now at doing math, and so they can solve, millions or, lots of these operations per second. This idea of what's in the executive order, which is the 10 to the 26th power flops, the idea is, like as you said, that this is this is only the biggest models will ever be at that level. The problem with that is there's this universal phenomenon in our industry that has a 50-year history, which is kind of extremely. It's like probably the most clear thing that we know of in terms of how to predict the future in our industry, which is called Moore's law, and it's this well-known phenomenon where every year chips get faster and cheaper. And I should also say just on that, like Moore's law, like if, for people tracking like NVIDIA, NVIDIA is now one of the most valuable companies in the world, it's worth like $3 trillion. It's like, this incredible, success story. The existence of a company and the reason is because their chips are the standard AI chips, for now. And so this is now the largest profit incentive the global chip industry has ever had to be able to figure out how to apply Moore's law to chips, to be able to compete with NVIDIA, to be able to drive down prices, to be able to drive up volume. And so and even Jensen Huang, who runs NVIDIA and is a good friend of ours, he's doing this. He's going to drive this as hard as possible. And he has predictions that he's on the record that there's going to be massive improvement in the speed of these chips and reducing the cost from here on out. And so over the next decade, there's going to be this massive reduction in cost on the chip side. And so things today that look very expensive and very hard to do are going to get to be very easy and very cheap. And there are many historical precedents for this. I'll just give you my personal favorite one, which was the original Sony PlayStation, which is a gaming console.
Yeah, I have one.
Play Call of Duty on. Yes, people know about those. When those first shipped, those were export controlled. And so Sony was not legally allowed to ship those to countries that might have their own nuclear programs, because, like Iraq, because at the time, because the chips in them were viewed as too powerful and could potentially be used to make nuclear weapons. And this illustrates sort of the fundamental issue, which is like, and the reason why is that is because somebody previously had set a flops limit for supercomputers, right? And then Moore's law kicked in, and then the Sony PlayStation shows up as a $300 consumer device and has that flops capability, and all of a sudden you're export controlling.
The beauty of GPUs.
The beauty of GPUs. Yeah, the PlayStation was one of the first GPUs, had one of the first GPUs in it, and so these restrictions that look like they make sense, like don't make sense very quickly. I'll give you another example of how this kind of deflation has happened. When OpenAI first released GPT-2, which was kind of the first LLM that worked, they actually refused to release it in the beginning because they had all these warnings about how dangerous it was and the safety and all that. Sitting here today, there's now open source. GPT-2 is now open source. And Andre Karpathy, who was a co-founder of OpenAI, who has left, actually now has an open source version of GPT-2 where you can train your own GPT-2 from scratch for less than $100 in compute costs.
Well,
right. And so it's all, this is like, it went from, 10 million or something to like $100, right? That kind of order of magnitude drop. So the things today that look incredibly expensive and look incredibly exotic are going to get mainstream and then cheap, and then everybody's going to have them. By the way, every computer science student is going to have models of this power on their laptops. You're going to have models like this on your phone. I think within 5 years, you're going to have models of this size on your phone. I think the deflation effect on this is going to hit really hard. And so these things are going to hit, and these are going to be just like microprocessors. These are going to be universal products that basically AI is going to get built into everything, and everybody's going to have it in every device. And so basically the regime that, the government is threatening to put in place right now is going to, by using this limit, they're going to basically enshrine the 2 or 3 companies that they believe are the only companies that matter as sort of the permanent monopolies. And they're going to just basically destroy the startup ecosystem underneath that. And they're going to enshrine essentially an OPEC of AI straight out of the gate. This is one of those things, like, this is so crazy that, like, there's this, like, sort of I have this very kind of big question of, like, is this like ignorance or is this malevolence, right? Like, do they not understand what they're doing, or are they doing this deliberately to put a cartel in place? And either way, like, I find it completely unacceptable.
Yeah. Well, it kind of gets into, this thing that we've spoken about before, which is this idea that you can predict the future, and it kind of the precautionary principle, so to speak. So, and as Yogi Berra says, the trouble with predictions is they're hard, especially about the future. And, if they could predict the future, and like, the easy kind of way of obviously the future is unpredictable, because if they could predict it, they'd be like quite a bit more rich than Elon Musk or anybody. Right. So of course nobody can predict the future, and particularly about these kinds of things. And we know we can't predict the future, and it's our whole job to try to predict the future. But to write policy about it before it comes to be is just super dangerous. And I think that we've seen that in Europe, where they've basically eliminated almost all innovation through this idea of the precautionary principle, trying to, like, stop the future before it happens. So that's probably the most concerning thing for me.
Another thing I'd highlight is, like, look, it turns out AI it's math. And I mean, it's math in the sense of, like, it turns out it's actually, like, just math.
They're just big math models. They're giant equations.
Giant equations. And specifically, it's an area of mathematics called linear algebra, and there's a key algorithm called gradient descent. And, like, and this stuff, by the way, this stuff is taught in every university. This stuff, all over the world, this stuff is in YouTube videos.
It's all over the internet.
It's all over the internet. They're it's the standard textbooks. Like, this is not rocket science.
It's kind of hard to hide.
Nuclear physics. This is operating in plain sight. And so the idea that this is going to be bottled up, the idea, and by the way, again, this relates to kind of national versus global policy, the idea that we're going to deliberately hamstring ourselves through onerous regulations while the rest of the world lights up on this, and while China lights up on this, there are very few secrets in this space. And so basically any limitations like this we put on ourselves are just going to disadvantage the US versus the rest of the world.
Yeah, this is kind of, one thing we talk about quite a bit, where you get into these laws, there's law and law enforcement. And if you put in place a law that's impossible to enforce, then you end up in a state of what, is known as anarcho-tyranny, where you have anarchy for the people who don't abide by the law, they can do whatever they want, and then tyranny for people who are law-abiding citizens, because no matter how carefully you try to comply with the Byzantine government regulations, you're gonna screw something up and get nailed. So it is a kind of weirdly horrible policy idea, I think. And so just another of the things that we've been worried about and dealing with, and how we get to some of these conclusions on policy.
And if I had to say, if I hadn't seen how blockchain played out, I wouldn't necessarily
that's not been good.
Feel this strongly, but I've seen where this road leads. And you can see it right now in real time in an adjacent sector, and it's been catastrophic. And we cannot, the country cannot afford to have this happen again.
We're so early in the industry. We're seeing, like, really important innovations all across the industry. There's people from everywhere, every walk of life, every country, who are doing amazing things on the AI front. And to go like, oh, I know how the whole industry is going to play out for the next 20 years right now.
And then I'll just, my big concern is with what we saw with crypto was the foreshadowing. And it's going to happen in AI.
Well, unleashes the administrative state to do, what they do, and and I have no confidence that they'll even be with us. Although, it's not the whole administrative state, but certainly the parts that have been affecting us.
Yeah, but if there's a reign of terror, from the government for AI, the way that there has been for blockchain, the country is in profound trouble, and that it's the default path, and it's just completely unacceptable. Yeah,
so very worrisome meeting, I would say, on it. It's yet to be determined. Like I said, there's many people in the White House, and it's kind of yet to be fought out, and we'll see how it goes. But it's certainly extremely worrisome.